Hello horror hounds, we are almost at the end of our run through the films of Dario Argento. We've reached Giallo, a film that's probably more famous for Adrian Brody blocking the release of the film while he sued the producers for the full pay he was owed. So I wasn't going into this with great expectations. I'd heard really bad things. And then the film opened and I was in instantly recognisable Argento territory. Turin, the opera house, his gloriously fluid camera, foreigners abroad, this time Japanese students, on the last night of their stay in Turin. And when they part ways in the night and one of them steps outside into a sudden downpour, a sure sign in an Argento movie that murder is imminent. And then we suddenly jump after her murder to the backstage of a fashion show, which instantly brings to mind, from any Giallo fan, Mario Bava's genre-founding 1964 film Blood and Black Lace. I was in such comfortable territory. Everything was in its right place. And then the rest of the movie happened. There are frustrating flashes of verve, the old Dario magic, to tantalise long-term Argento fans in amongst a mostly tawdry affair. Giallo suffered from a multitude of production problems that unfortunately affected the story that eventually appeared on screen. Details that I can find online are very scant, and again, even those are tantalising and hint at a better story behind the camera than the one we eventually got up front, including the possibility of an alternate ending, one so wildly divergent from the one we finally received that it actually potentially changes the identity of the killer. If anyone knows what that alternative ending is, please tell me. I can't find out. My Google foo has failed me. Giallo feels a lot like the evil twin to The Card Player, which we reviewed a couple of videos ago. Mr. Hyde to that film's Dr. Jekyll. The Giallo movies of the 70s and 80s that Argento undeniably helped pioneer seeded the ground for many evolutionary branches of the horror and thriller cinematic family tree that we know well today. With both The Card Player and Giallo, Argento seems to be trying his hand at some of these subgenres that find their antecedents in his masterpieces from the 70s and 80s. In The Card Player, as we discussed in my video for that film, he was playing in the CSI-style police tech forensic thriller mould. But another one of the offshoots of the Giallo was certainly the American corporate, low overhead, high return, business savvy slasher movie, the sort of son of the Giallo. And if the slasher is the son of the Giallo, then the slasher's inbred, drooling cousin is the torture porn movie. It's here in Giallo where Argento seems to be trying his hand at that trend, following trends now rather than making them. Or perhaps he's taking a pass at the kind of places Takeshi Miike would often go. There does seem to be an underlying interest in the Japanese horror movie culture. The first victim is a Japanese student, and the killer seems to use violent hentai manga to help him relive the sexual thrill of the kill in a really grubby scene. Do we really ever need to see a serial killer masturbating in front of a laptop to hentai manga in a Dario Argento movie? Later in the film, Adrian Brody's detective Enzo buys a volume of Japanese pornographer stroke photographer Araki's work, but any such allusions to the work of Takeshi Miike or Japanese horror are only really in passing. Any time we spend in the killer's grungy green and rust basement of screaming women tied to gurneys next to an assortment of tools, I feel a little depressed, because a once great maestro, a bona fide god amongst horror directors, is reduced to slumming it with this director-for-hire grubbiness. It's like watching your father or grandfather trying to be down with the kids doing Gangnam Style when he invented the fucking twist. It's called Giallo. When Dario Argento makes a film called Giallo, it signifies something. It's a statement of intent, or at least it should be. When the title is revealed to be a kind of pun, an undermining of audience expectations. It's not fun. It's a little like a slap in the face. Giallo means yellow in Italy. The Giallo film tradition takes its name from a series of pulpy Italian crime and thriller novels that had yellow covers. Giallo, this film, refers to the nickname of the killer, Yellow, who has yellow, jaundiced skin from a liver disease. The film itself doesn't even fit into the Giallo tradition, so it doesn't even work on two levels. So sadly, the killer, Yellow, as I'll refer to him now, joins that esteemed pantheon of yellow film villains, from that yellow bastard in Sin City and the permanently jaundiced Billy from the shithouse 2006 Black Christmas remake. But still, there are flashes of brilliance. That's what's so hard to stomach. The locations, as ever, are sourced brilliantly, shot amazingly. I've said it in previous videos, Argento can shoot the hell out of a city, and Turin once again looks amazing. He still has an eye for a shot. That uniquely Argento-esque camera movement is all present, correct and confident. It's just that the material has no style. To add even more frustration, Adrian Brody's character Enzo has a flashback, a sort of flashback dream sequence to his childhood, which would have been in the mid-70s, early 80s. And the flashback scene has all the mise en scène, the set dressing, the lighting, the style of murder even, from Argento's late 70s, early 80s work. And for 2 or 3 brief minutes, you think, look, he can still do it. He can still do it. Time passes. I understand that. Audiences' tastes pass. And I realise that in his recent films, he has come to increasingly self-refer to his previous movies. But at this point, to go back for like a 3-4 minute section of the film and go, right, well, this is set in the early 80s, late 70s, so it's going to look a little bit like my Giallo movies from that time, and then leave it and go back to the sort of grungy, digital, just sort of slightly dirty, torture porny movie that we're watching, is a tease too far. So let's talk a little about Adrian Brody, for he is the police investigator. He's a producer on the film. I think he possibly bailed the film out at some stage when it got into financial difficulties. He reworked the script with Argento. To Adrian Brody's credit, I get the impression that, damn, did this guy really want to work with Dario Argento? But his police detective, Enzo, his investigation seems to involve smoking, brooding, and whispering, relying on far too many leaps of logic and coincidence to get anywhere in the investigation, and then the film just ends. It seems to be missing an entire third act. All the way through, I was expecting something totally insane to happen. Let me try and explain why. There were 2 possibilities running through my mind. Brody's character Enzo has a past. As a child, in that flashback dream sequence I mentioned, he witnesses his mother's violent murder. A few years later, he discovers his mother's killer working in a butcher's shop. The young Enzo returns that night to return the favour, brutally beats and stabs his mother's killer to death, only to be discovered by a beat cop. A beat cop who now, in present day, turns out to be his captain, who at the time helped him cover up the murder, helped him join the police force, and now helps him track and catch serial killers. I honestly thought this was all going somewhere. There are lots of elliptical allusions to Enzo's methods in catching killers being not by the book, and there being reasons why he works alone in a basement. I thought he had an agreement with his ranking officer that when he caught these fuckers, he would kill them. He knew, they knew how to deal with these people, not put them through the courts, the time, the expense, risk them getting let off. I thought that was going to be the twist, and all of this really obtuse, weird, twitchy performance and strange non-investigation was going to go somewhere like that. That would have been fucking cool, right? No. The other option in my head was even crazier. When your star is Adrian Brody and the villain clearly has an enormous prosthetic nose to hide their face, and it's clearly Adrian Brody playing the role of Yellow, the killer, you prime yourself for some kind of insane revelation that they're related, or that the cop is the killer. You start to make leaps of logic that the cop's story and the killer's story are happening in separate time periods. You think that the cop wears prosthetics to commit his crimes, or then you start to think that it's psychological and Adrian Brody is how he looks to the world, but in his head, Giallo, this sort of disfigured prosthetic creature, is how he sees himself in his mind. Then you start to think about Nicolas Cage playing Charlie Kaufman and his fictional twin brother Donald in adaptation, and you think about Donald's movie script in adaptation for a film called The Three, where the killer, the woman he's kidnapped, and the cop chasing him are all the same person. And you think about those quotes from that film with Charlie saying, how could you have somebody held prisoner in a basement and working at a police station at the same time? And Donald just says, well, trick photography. And then later on, Donald says, I'm putting in a chase sequence. So the killer flees on horseback with the girl and the cops after them on a motorcycle, and it's like a battle between motors and horses, like technology versus horse. And Charlie says, and they're still all one person, right? Sadly, Giallo isn't even as audacious as that. It's certainly, if it had gone to that levels of insanity, be talked about in cult circles rather than as yet another example of the creative decline of someone whose career had been at such heights. We've got one more film left in our jaunt through the works of Dario Argento. It's Dracula 3D.